Well, as we mentioned, the carnival kicks off tomorrow for the Victoria Racing Club. It's Amy Victoria Derby Day, and of course the 4 days of the carnival, as usual, will be covered by Network 10. And joining me online, the race caller, Dan Mielicki. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Paul.
How's things, Dan?
Yeah, really good. Getting right into the swing of things, and the start of the biggest week in racing is right at our doorstep.
That's for sure. It's not far away now. In fact, within 24 hours, you'll be out at the track and gearing up for the call of the first.
Yeah, most certainly. It won't be long at all. Big day, 9 races, 11:25 start, but the quality day, and I think recognised as the best day of racing that we experience, certainly in Australia, and I think Australians would say anywhere in the world. So it's one of the great days, no doubt about that.
That's for sure. Tell us a bit about yourself, Dan. Let's take it back to where you started your calling career, and you started, of course, at a young age.
I did. I had my first professional job when I was 8 years old. But of course, at that age, being so young, it was quite a gimmick to see someone so young attempt to call races, and I did that a number of times. From the age of about 8 to 14, I would be a guest caller at a lot of tracks throughout Victoria and New South Wales or southern New South Wales, and calling 1 or 2 races or more, and sometimes the whole program. So I got quite a lot of experience at a lot of different tracks, probably more than most at a young age. But before I got that 8-year-old gig at Terang in Western Victoria, I was practicing my calling at all of the racetracks. A lot of budding race callers do this even today, and that's where I would go. But of course, I was only 7 at the time, which is younger than most. But I thought that I knew what I wanted to do, and looking back now, it probably helps because it's a giant head start that I had, because I was able to have experience through my very tender years, and by the time I was 16, I had a full-time job with Channel 10. So in that sense, it certainly worked for me because of the experience. It's something that you can't gain overnight.
That's for sure. You mentioned that Terang was your first call. That was a Cup Day, wasn't it?
It was, a Cobden Cup Day it was, February 1978. And the first race I actually called was a hurdle. And at the time, there are certain horses that leave impressions on you when you're growing up, whether it be, in my case, the mid-70s, or, obviously if you're older, there might be a period of time that you recognise the horses, probably think of them even greater than what they actually were. And the first hurdle, the first race I called was a hurdle, and there was a horse called Chocolate Royal in it. I'm sure you'd remember it.
I certainly do, yes, Chocolate Royal.
He was probably nothing special, but in our eyes he was something special, because we grew up listening to Chocolate Royal seemingly going around every week, and he was in that first race. So I thought that was just great, calling a country hurdle at Terang. And then a maiden, just to throw the spanner in the works, and the Cobden Cup, which Bill's Choice beat Duero. It's something you can't really wipe away from your brain.
Yeah, you always remember calling home that first winner, don't you?
You certainly do.
That's for sure. So some of the other tracks, you mentioned you called in country Victoria and also over the border into southern New South Wales. Yeah,
well, Berrigan was the second venue, and in fact I had quite an association with Berrigan. The second race meeting I was to call, and again I was still 8 years old, it was only a month after Terang. I was flown up there to be guest race caller, just to call 2 races on a 7-event card. And on the morning of the race, the usual race caller had alerted authorities that he'd been in a car accident. He was quite badly injured, and he couldn't call. So the whole meeting was thrust upon me, and I called 7 races that day, the whole card. It was about 45 degrees. I got blisters on my hand through holding onto the railing near the broadcast box, which was well out in the open. It was a memorable day, and it continued a terrific association I had with Berrigan. Some years later, I went back there, and as a 14-year-old, I was their caller. I called all their race meetings, and it was quite a place, because that very first day that I called there, back in 78, I called a mare winning called Better Fantasy, which probably meant nothing at the time, but later on she would go on to be the mother of Better Loosen Up, who was bred just nearby by Howard Martin, who at the time was the president of the club. So we had quite an insight to one of the greatest horses that we've ever seen. and I actually called Campaign King having his first start there. So, Berrigan's pretty close to my heart. There were some very special moments there.
Yeah, fond memories from my point of view as a caller. I can remember going up with you, Dan, on one of the callers' days when we put together an illustrious group of 5 of us, headed up there and had a great day at Berrigan.
We did. They looked after us.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just, I think it was one venue. It was racing. To experience racing, you probably had to go to Berrigan because the prize money, I don't think, would ever be that flash. Yet the horses would go there, and the horses kept popping up there, and we had some great times with our race callers' day. They were fantastic. And as far as for tutoring is concerned, you really, as people say, you must sink or swim. So you've got to be thrown in the deep end. And at Berrigan, if you ever called at Berrigan, you were thrown in the deep end because it was a big track that had big fields, and it could often get quite dusty, Paul, couldn't it? So you really learned something when you called there. You
certainly did. I recall that 900-metre dog leg sort of start. That's a very tricky one to call, and also the start right over the back behind the trees tested us out.
Yes, especially when you hadn't called a meeting there for a couple of months and the trees had grown a couple more feet. It made it increasingly difficult. And they raced with maximums of 16 and 18 horses. But, I've got some fond memories of Berrigan and relating to some of those great horses that we talked about as well.
That's for sure. OK, Dan, now you mentioned your involvement, of course, with Channel 10 from the age of 16. When did you first call the Cup Carnival for them?
Well, the first Cup Carnival that I was involved with Channel 10 was 1987. And I called a few races on each day, or maybe even one race on each of the days.
Yeah, that was when Bruce McAvaney was there?
That's right, yeah. Bruce was their main caller, and I'd only recently been employed as a sporting journalist and a number 2 caller. I was only 16 at the time. So 1987, I got to call some races through the carnival, which was fantastic. I think that the first day I called the Carbine Club Stakes. It's a great race. So that was a thrill, and a year later, which was 1988, I call every race bar the Derby, the Cup, the Oaks, and the Group 1 on the final day. So really, I did the bulk of the calling in 1988, and then from 1989, it was all mine, the whole lot. So the first Melbourne Cup for Channel 10 and Derby, obviously, and Oaks was in 1989, but I have been gearing up for them since 1987.
Right, so your first Melbourne Cup was terrific with Shane Dye in the saddle.
It certainly was.
And the Amy Derby that year was Stylish Century.
Yes, yeah, it was fantastic. Stylish Century, of course, ran around in the Melbourne Cup as well, but he was a real dynamo, second in the Cox Plate, and he was a very good horse and very exciting, and it was a great year, a year of terrific beating Superimpose, and I suppose because it was my first Melbourne Cup call for Channel 10, it makes it all the more memorable, but it seems not that long ago, and yet, we've almost lost it beyond the decade back.
That's for sure, yeah. Amy Victoria Derby, tell us a few of the other memories of the Derbies over the years, Dan.
Well, when the Derby comes along, Paul, often you experience a field of horses that, you mightn't think that's that flash, but then go on 12 months' time and you could well have the Melbourne Cup favourite and a weight-for-age champion. You're seeing them in their youth, obviously. It's a 3-year-old classic, but early on in the season, so they've only been 3 for a couple of months. So a lot of the time, the names are not superstars at the time, but go on to be, and in 1993, there was no doubt that Mahogany's win was just outstanding. He wasn't really recognised as a stayer, but his brilliance seemed to get him through, and that's something you don't often talk about in a 2,500-metre race. In 94, Blevik beat Dane Win, and in 95, Nothing Like a Dane beat Octagonal. They're great horses, and I suppose they're the races that stand out the most.
That's right, yes. The Amy Victoria Derby, and an early tip for tomorrow for the Derby?
Thought it was a tough race with the key depended on the weather. I know they've tipped some rain, but we haven't seen it as yet. And if they were going to line up now, you'd be looking at a perfect surface, a good track. So, look, the class runner's Shogun Lodge, and he's drawn barrier 1. That might just be a huge help for him. The query is on him being able to get the 2,500 metres, but from barrier 1, that probably saves him a couple of lengths, even though you would expect him to get back to at least midfield. But the other horse I've been impressed with is a genuine type of stayer and has that Bart Cummings type polish, and that's Cloth of Gold. And the other one I like is the other Bart Cummings horse, Liberty Hall, but he might be a better 3-year-old in the autumn. I really think he could turn into a top-class horse. But they're my main three, but luck and running with a big field is so important.
That's for certain, Dan. Yes, now we've mentioned the Amy Victoria Derby, of course, on what seemingly is the greatest day's racing, certainly in Australia, if not in the world, tomorrow. Tuesday, it's Cup Day. Just before we ask you for your early Cup tip, the memories of the Cup over the years that you've called.
Well, I think every year stands out for a different reason. Certainly that year with Terrific was just fantastic. I was just buoyed that year, but when Kingston Rule won, I was, absolutely ecstatic with the way that I called, and Let's Elope was the most exciting Cup in '91. You can remember '92 for the wet with Sub-Zero, '93 for the barnstorming vintage crop, '94 with Jeune, who was just ridden perfectly, and very similar to the Saintly. They were horses that looked the winner with a lap to go, and that's quite amazing. That doesn't often happen. We had another bog track in '95, so you remember it for the wet. There were umbrellas up, and I remember when Doremus, who's got very prominent blue and pink colours, came around the home turn. The pink was obscured by mud, so it was quite an amazing Cup to call. And then you had the thrill of Might and Power and Doremus in '97. And last year with the mares fighting it out, every year I could find a positive, and I almost couldn't rate one better than the other, but if you had to push me, I'd still say Terrific.
Fair enough. Now, the Cup, of course, the field isn't finalised as yet, but early thoughts for Tuesday?
Well, you've got the class runners, Sky Heights and Tie the Knot. There's no doubt about that. They've got to sit very prominently. I wouldn't be too sure that there's the depth there this year, so I would think there's probably about 8 chances maximum, at least the way I'm looking at it. They are 2 of them. Arena and Labille, 2 other horses that came out of the Caulfield Cup, which has been a terrific lead-up race to the Melbourne Cup for years. And Arena was unlucky there, and Labille is a Zabille mare, and they quinelled it last year, the Zabille mares. And then you look at the international contingent, and certainly the tip around for Travel Mate's been so strong in the last week. Also Yavana's Pace, another horse that can race up on the speed. And getting away from that group of horses, a horse like Rogan Josh, who you must respect from the Bart Cummings camp, who seems to be performing very well. Obviously the 3,200 metres would be a query, but when Bart trains them, you'd be mad to query that. So I think they were the chances. The only other reservation would be Central Park. So I'm not really thinking there's a lot of chances in this year's Cup at all, but I suppose 7 or 8 runners out of a field of 24, still about 33% of the runners. So that makes it open enough.
Right, so we look forward to the 4 days of the Carnival, of course all covered by Network 10, Dan?
Yes, they've got 4 great days, the days that seem to be getting longer every year, with 9 tomorrow, 9 most days in fact, and 10 on Cup Day with about a 10:30 start. It's a long one, the Tuesday, but the racing will be fantastic, particularly tomorrow. Tomorrow's the great day and really sets up the week.
Right. Well, we wish you all the best, Dan, with the call of the Cup and all the Carnival, and look forward to catching up with all the action on Network 10 this year.
Thanks very much, Paul.
Thanks, Dan. That's Dan Mielicki there from Network 10, who'll be calling the 4 days of the VRC Carnival this year, starting with Amy Victoria Derby Day tomorrow. This is Triple S FM.
The leader from traffic.